Hello again, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. We hope you enjoyed the food and refreshment that we have already prepared for you just now. And to continue with our program, we will now begin our second panel discussion. Okay, now we're going to start our second panel discussion with the topic of economic transformation through digitalization impact to nations' trade and investment. Please welcome our moderator for the second session, Ms. Amelia Yahya.
Well, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome and thank you so much for being here. And now let us get down to business. I hope you guys have all had very good lunch and a great dose of coffee, because now we're going to start the second panel discussion of the day. We're going to be talking about an array of topics surrounding economic transformation through digitalization, the great impact we had on a nation's investments and trade. But first of all, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Amelia Yahya, and I'll be your moderator for today. And on behalf of our dearest host, allow me to extend our profound gratitude and sincere thanks to everyone for your participation and for your attendance here today. And ladies and gentlemen, to start with the second panel discussion on the economic transformation through digitalization and the great impact we had on a nation's investments and trade, let us first reflect and look back on the pandemic. While the pandemic has created quite a tumult since the past 2 years, one thing for sure that we've all experienced and noticed was the great change and the significant impact it had on the consumer's behavior as well as how businesses work. And the great spectacle that we've all had and witnessed was the great acceleration of digital adoption, and it sure was quite a sight to see. And ladies and gentlemen, during this great pandemic, the digital technologies have sure helped us to navigate through the worst public health crisis in our lifetime. And all of us here, from businesses at any scale and public sectors, as well as us as individuals and companies as well, have all frantically flocked and resorted to applying digital technologies to try to take a chance at survival during the pandemic. Ladies and gentlemen, we have used the digital technologies to try and manage our activities as well as our work, as well as boost connections with one another. So, here it is, even services traditionally deemed to need more personal interactions, such as those in the healthcare field or those in education, have all also flocked to digital technologies to try to make sense of it all by conducting in many areas remotely or virtually. And of course, that we can see how thanks to public support and combined with the support and commitment of government officials with the supportive government policies, growth as we saw in digital ecosystem was evident. So ladies and gentlemen, now that we're here today in Indonesia, allow me to highlight a little bit about Indonesia first. And well, here we are in Indonesia, being the fourth most populous country in the world, as well as the largest island nation in the world, which doesn't make logistics the easiest thing to do, as well as the third largest democracy in the world and the largest economy in Southeast Asia. We could see how the population of mobile phone users in Indonesia is quite large. Therefore, during the pandemic, as we saw, many businesses have not survived, while others have actually seen a revival. And that's exactly what we're going to be talking about during the second panel discussion of the day, and that is on economics transition through digitalization and the impact on the nation's investments and trade. And ladies and gentlemen, allow me to invite our great speakers speakers here on stage, and they're indeed the experts in their field, and together we're going to gain lots of insights from them and learn from them. And it is with the greatest pleasure and honor that I shall invite to the stage the Vice Minister of State-Owned Enterprises Ministry of the Republic of Indonesia. Let us give a big round of applause for His Excellency, Mr. Kartiko Wiryoatmojo. Your Excellency, we're so happy to have you here. And ladies and gentlemen, and next allow me to invite to the stage Mr. Ahmad Mazari, the President of Microsoft Asia. Welcome, Mr. Ahmad. And ladies and gentlemen, next allow me to also welcome Mr. Stephen Ng, the CEO of China International Capital Corporation of Singapore. Let's give him a big round of applause. Last but not least, allow me to also invite to the stage Ms. Vaishali Rastogi, the Global Head of TNT BCG of Boston Consulting Group. Let's give her a big round of applause. Well, everyone, I'm so incredibly honored to have you here today. And today we're going to be talking about an array of topics surrounding the economic transition through digitalization. And as we all know, these our speakers need no introduction. They're all the experts in their field, and I can't wait to be hearing your insights. But before we get down to business and start highlighting on the lessons learned during the pandemic, as well as highlighting on what we learned through the transition and the adoption, the acceleration of digital technologies, I would like to allow everyone to please maybe deliver a little bit of the opening remarks or a little bit of introduction on yourselves and the recent work that you've done. And maybe we could start with Ms. Vaishali first.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for having me here. Actually, I may be the global head for TMT, Tech Media Telco for BCG, but I would say Indonesia made me. I started my career 26 years ago, and I spent my first 10 years visiting your beautiful country almost every week for 10 years. And then, of course, I went on to play global roles. So I'm really glad to be back home. And I now live in Singapore, and I just wanted to say that in my role as Global Technology Head, we've been seeing a lot of impact from digitization, the good. There's also the parts that are not so good. I mean, we talked about the good, which is the whole digital adoption. The not so good, which is the displacement it has in terms of people who are not digitally included, so the digital divide, as well as the huge implications in terms of job shifts that are happening in the economy. And I would say the last one would be really what I call the moment for disruption. Technology and digital is disrupting industries, and you can either seize it or you can lose from it. So which one would you take up as SOEs? So that would be one theme that I would like to touch on today as well.
Thank you very much, Ms. Vaishali. And you're only an island hop away, but you're home. And now we'd like to welcome Minister Kartiko to deliver. You don't need any self-introduction, so maybe the recent work that you've done as well as anything else that you'd like to deliver.
Yeah. Just quickly, I started my career in private sector actually. I was with PwC and BCG a long time ago. So I was same with Vaishali at the time. And then I moved to State-Owned Enterprise in Bank Mandiri, and then moved to some other institution before I became the CEO of Mandiri from 2015 to 2018. And then I was appointed as a Vice Minister. I think since I joined as a Vice Minister, the digital transformation within SOE has started to gain momentum. I think we were quite late if we compare ourselves to the startups. I think the startups have started the digital revolution probably around early 2010, 2012. But then we're catching up with a lot of initiative across the board, but particularly how to actually create an ecosystem within the state-owned enterprise and also with the startups and also other ecosystem players. So later on, I will also showcase some of the early success that we have. So we are currently pushing for some super apps that is driven by the financial service industry to become like the center of the BUMN ecosystem in which we attach other transactions such as transportation, logistics, and so on and so forth. So we believe by having a simple, accessible, and ease of use for people, then Indonesia can move from offline to online easily, and also getting the efficiency and fast transactions. So we seen it, and we believe it's going to be moving even faster after the pandemic, especially in the banks, for example, where the transactions using digital apps has surged exponentially, and the branches become a bit empty. ATM also become just a infrastructure for supporting, but digital apps becoming the center of all the activities of the banks. So this is also interesting because I think Indonesia, despite the developing country status, but I think the adoption is faster, even compared to some other more advanced countries. Indonesian is so used to use gadget and is a very adaptable to social media. I think we are one of the largest users of Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. So naturally, the Gen Z, even the Gen X, probably now 70-80% converted to super apps usage. So I think this is something that is really on the verge of really major revolutions, and I think we can really push the boundaries towards other sectors: edutech, govtech, health tech, and so on and so forth.
Absolutely, and Your Excellency, I have seen this great super app and how much Indonesia needs to have an app like this that integrates all the technological advances as well as all the institutions that we need. And now with Mr. Ahmad, allow me to address you by your first names. That's how we do it here in Indonesia. Mr. Ahmad, and the floor is yours now to deliver your opening remarks.
Yeah, thank you and good afternoon and great to be here. I have responsibility for Microsoft's business across Asia Pacific and Japan, but essentially at the core, our mission is to exactly enable what Pak Tiko just said, which is to empower every person and every organization in the region to achieve more. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And Mr. Stephen?
Thank you, Amelia. So for CICC, maybe a quick introduction about who we are. We are a Beijing-based investment bank. We were set up in 1995. The purpose of us being set up as a joint venture then, in the mid-90s between Morgan Stanley and China Construction Bank was really to help China go through its economic reform. For instance, the first IPO we did as part of the economic reform was the listing of China Mobile. That was back in 1997, where the Chinese government carved out, the telco assets of Guangzhou and Zhejiang provinces. So since then, we've been very involved in SOE reforms. I'm definitely looking forward to sharing some of the experiences that China has gone through, and hopefully, we can have some exchange of ideas here. Thank you.
Absolutely, and especially as China is now the world's #2 in terms of a digital ecosystem, we have so much to learn. And now, ladies and gentlemen, as we start our panel discussion with the economic transitions, I would like to ask Minister Kartiko, this is regarding how in Indonesia, especially in the early days of the pandemic, things were not easy here. Just as in any other countries, but especially here being the fourth most populous country in the world, and we're also the largest island nation in the world, logistics, distribution was tough. Therefore, the Ministry of State-Owned Enterprises had a lot of work to do in trying to fulfill the gaps of that. And in Indonesia, during the surge of COVID-19, it has forced the government to impose such a strict restriction, unfortunately constraining Indonesia's economic growth. So at the time, what were the challenges did you face or the Ministry of State-Owned Enterprises face to digitalize the untapped segments of the society, especially those that need it the most when it comes to welfare?
Yeah. One of the focus that we did at the time is to make sure that our services to public is not stopped. So then we look into the area that we are doing the service to people, for example, banking. So I take banking as the easiest example here. So in BRI, the largest state-owned bank, which also have the largest customer base, around 35 million. So we have to be able to still serve the 35 million people, which is spreading across the archipelago of Indonesia. And at the time, the interaction, probably 70-80% or 90% is still offline. So we have to educate them to actually start adopting digital fast so that they could still service their loan, they could still apply for new loan, and they could do transactions online. So what we did in the first couple of months is really doing a massive program to actually educate the customer how to do digital adoption and start using our apps to actually do their transactions. So then they can still do trading from their home. They can still deliver their goods to their customer using a logistic that we provide to our apps and so on and so forth. So that actually resulted in a stable growth in the micro segment, even though during COVID there is no movement, but there is still a disbursement of new loan and a massive restructuring of loan. So actually BRI has to restructure 3.3 million accounts. Can you imagine restructuring 3.3 million accounts with amount of 260 trillion? So around almost $18 billion transactions, $18 billion volume of loan that we have to restructure. And we did it through a digital apps called Pre-Spot at the time. Otherwise, it's impossible to restructure 3.3 million accounts using physical interactions. So all this done through digital apps. And interestingly, post-COVID, these people in the rural area, then they get used to actually continue their offline transaction, their online transaction, and it become O2O interaction with our banks. So this is very interesting. And then through Telkom, we did also service to the nation by creating Peduli Lindungi. Peduli Lindungi, as you know, is probably one of the most advanced track and trace digital apps in the world, probably. Because I bring it to several countries, to US, to Europe. People in Europe and US, so Indonesia have this kind of apps. Like this track and trace is actually quite advanced, and it's actually very useful during the peak of COVID. Because people get all this black, green notification if they are infected, and we actually connect that, of course, with the help of Ministry of Health, to the telemedicine and delivery of medicine. So in the last 1 year of COVID, actually a lot of people who get sick and they get diagnosed as positive, then they can do a telemedicine with the central provider, and people just dispatch the medicine directly to their home. I think this is really a new thing. And I think now telemedicine really becoming easy service to people. More people now realize that they don't have to physically go to the health center and so on and so forth, and they could book and order a proper medication through online as well. So I think those two are probably the most notable changes here: the banking service and the health service during COVID, that now becoming more permanent as a service that people already move from offline to online. And I think as I mentioned earlier, once we can get the critical mass, like Peduli Lindungi is downloaded by 95 million downloaders. So now we are actually talking with the other ministries how to actually utilize Peduli Lindungi post-COVID. Can it be a G2P tools from government to people for subsidy, for other usage? So this is something that we want to move forward with Peduli Lindungi. But on the banking side, what is interesting is the activities that they built around the super apps becoming wider and wider. So now we're experimenting also with one of our super apps, which is more urban, living under Mandiri, that actually start selling airline ticket, hotel booking, train seat. Then people can use the super app not only as a financial service provider, but also as a multi-service platform. I think this is something that Indonesia will go, so we can create an ecosystem where people don't have to download 10 or 20 apps, they can just download 1 or 2 mega super apps, and everything is connected through API in the system. I think it's good that central bank and also OJK, our regulators, allowing what we call is API open banking. So this is, I think, a big revolution for Indonesia, which I think, as I mentioned earlier, probably is more advanced than some other countries.
How incredible. So reaching out to these untapped segments in a way that is so convenient, fast, as well as efficient, Minister Kartiko. How amazing. And now, of course, Ms. Vaishali, you being the leader in terms of when it comes to the media and telecommunication and marketing and pricing, you out of all people know that digitalization and the adoption of it all is not a new thing. And how this landscape is an ever-changing landscape, and the power and the need to keep up, especially now, is more than ever before. So my question is, what are the key recent trends that we need to pay attention to?
So I think Patiko already mentioned a few, so let me build off that. And I think you started your opening remarks with that. So the first is, you've all seen that meme on internet, right? That COVID did more for digitization than any CEO or minister did. And I guess while COVID was a very tough time, it certainly accelerated digitization massively. And when I say massively, just to give you a sense and perspective, if you talk of number of new users that got added during COVID in countries in ASEAN, whether you look at payments, you look at entertainment media, whether you look at e-commerce and shopping, by the way, it's gone up anywhere between 20 to about 30% new users coming into the market. And while some will fade away and go back to their own use, their offline use, I think that's a massive delta that has happened. And the second thing I would say is, if you look at it, it's happened in its own unique way. I think you talked about the way that the super app was being built here. If you look at commerce in this part of the world, it's not all through the grocery platform or all through just one way. It's all on the little micro SMEs that we talked about, that Eric talked about in the earlier thing. 90% of the economy or of the enterprises are SME. They went onto social media, they opened up a page, they sold their goods there, they found a way to get logistics and adopt digital payments. So the whole social commerce, Vietnam, Indonesia, Thailand are actually way ahead of the US or other Western markets. So I think the second point I wanted to say is, not only did we leapfrog specifically, second, we did it in a very unique way, as I was talking about. But then there's the flip side, which is there are elements that did not, that we do need to pay attention to. I think what I call the digital divide. And digital divide is not just having connectivity, and 95% of the world's population is next to a telco network. And in this hyper-competitive Indonesian market, it's not about just network access. It's about access, meaning do you have the right speeds? It's about affordability, meaning can you actually afford it, and not just on your own, but how to make it possible. And it's about the ability, meaning do you know how to use it? You touched upon how to train people to use stuff. Imagine, in the days of when 4G launched, you had to teach your mom how to do a FaceTime call. Well, I at least had to teach my 70-year-old mom, 10 years ago. But we have to figure out how to do that adoption for consumers, to train them, to make them digitally literate, but also for SMEs, which are not that digitally literate either. So that, to me, is the dark side of a very powerful revolution. And then the last point, as I said earlier, which is there are 2,000, I repeat the number, there are 2,000 unicorns that are disrupting traditional industries using technology, disrupting financial institutions, healthcare, industrial goods, etc. With the geopolitics, I can only say one thing. Indonesia and India are very attractive spaces. I knew that 25 years ago. People are now realizing it today. So you need to really be on the offensive. Otherwise, there's scope for massive disruption if you don't seize the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Ms. Vaishali. And of course, the adaptation that we all need, it's not just within governments or companies, it's also amongst the public as well. And now, Mr. Ahmad, being the president of Microsoft Asia, we still have so much to learn from you regarding, could you share with us the experiences as well as the partnerships that Microsoft had with G20 member countries, particularly here in Indonesia, and especially on the areas of digitalization, and how could cloud computing help public service delivery, inclusion, as well as boost economic recovery?
Yeah, thank you. I'll probably try and extend from what my previous fellow panelists spoke about. I think there are two areas that we played a pretty big role. One was inclusive education. Sometimes we forget that now children very easily are in virtual classrooms, are being educated from across the world. And this is the acceleration that the pandemic has created. I hope we don't have another one for more acceleration, but it certainly was the big upside from it. If you look at vaccine distribution, we played a very big role with our technology in helping equitable vaccine distribution. So those are two interesting areas that I would think from a global standpoint. In Indonesia, in the middle of the pandemic, we announced an extension of our data center zones. We're probably the widest in terms of global coverage on data centers. And as we heard from Paktiko and Vaishali, that cloud computing and cloud infrastructure is fundamental to inclusive growth. In Indonesia, we believe our data center investments will add over 60,000 jobs and over 6.3 billion in top line in the very short term. But to fuel that growth, education and skilling will be fundamental. There are estimates that the world will need 150 million new techies in the next 3 years. I'm sure with countries like Indonesia and India and in various parts of Asia, a fair share will be here. So we're investing in skilling significantly, and we've skilled about 48 million people. Just in Indonesia, we have skilled 24 million people and actually certified 600,000. So as you look at what is fundamental to progressive growth, while telecom coverage, as she pointed out, is like most of the population has it, I think our next stumbling block will be people's ability to use it, to code, and to accelerate the ability to make social inclusion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ahmad. And on the ability of having people make use of technology, Mr. Stephen Awara, I actually grew up in China. Yes, and back then I remember in the early year 2000s how China has developed and how fast the commitments that the people had to the speed of development. And when I went back recently before the pandemic, I could not recognize a thing because the city, everything has changed for the better. And my question for you is, considering China's digital economy is #2 ranked in the world, and how digitalization in China since the past decades have completely changed the nation economically and socially. Such an exciting country. So my question is, can you please share with us China's plans to drive digitalization of state-owned enterprises in the coming years?
Yeah, I'm not sure when was the last time you were in China. I've not visited China for 3 years for obvious reason. So definitely looking forward to visiting China.
Oh, me too.
Soon, yeah.
I miss it so much. I was there in 2018, and I was there since primary school.
Okay.
Yes, 我自己也是北京人. Yeah.
Okay. So I guess from China's perspective, as we all know, the economic growth situation in the world is becoming quite sluggish. And in this aspect, I think the digital economy has actually become a new leveler for economic growth and an important direction for countries to boost their economies in terms of new products, new services, new formats, etc., etc. The digital technology has become the main contributors of growth. In recent years, China's digital economy has developed robustly, and its industrial scale has continued to grow rapidly, ranking second to the world. Statistics show that from 2012 to 2021, the scale of China's digital economy should have increased from $1.5 trillion to $7 trillion, and the proportion of the digital economy in terms of GDP have increased from 21% to 40%. The digital economy has become crucially important for the economic development of China. So what are some of the specific initiatives which China has undertaken lately? So maybe I'll share some of those here. First of all, China has further committed to the development of its digital economy in its 14th five-year plan, which will cover between 2021 to 2025. Now, according to the plan, efforts will be made to accelerate the construction of information network infrastructure, a national level integrated big data center system, coordinating computing power, algorithms, data, and application resources. China will also enhance its capabilities in strategic areas such as sensors, quantum information, communications, ICs, and blockchain. It will also facilitate digital transformation of the supply chain to better utilize data resources and improve governance of the digital economy. The plan also emphasized on the industrial digital transformation, which will be led by SOEs in many regards. So SOEs are already accelerating the construction of the new digital infrastructure, and more than 80 centrally administered SOEs have built group-level data centers. Besides the data centers, new digital infrastructure also includes 5G technology and the industrial internet. For example, the number of 5G stations in China today totals something like 1.4 million, serving about 500 million users. More than half of the centrally administered SOEs have also built an industrial chain digital ecosystem collaboration platform. For example, the State Grid has built a cloud platform to promote the coordinated development of more than 3,000 upstream and downstream enterprises related to the energy industry. As early as August 2020, SASAC, which is the State-Owned Asset Supervision and Administration Commission, also issued 2 new notices aimed at giving guidance to the digital transformation of SOEs, focusing on areas in digitization of product innovation, making production operations more intelligent, and creation of digital economy system within each industry. The key to judging whether the transformation results were successful or not is whether transition value has been achieved. For example, in the digitization of product innovation, there needs to be a measure of value addedness in the innovation process. In the case of making production operations more intelligent, the end goal was a better and more dynamic allocation of resources and the optimization of global value chain. In the case of industrial ecosystem, the KPI was to attract partners in the entire value chain. So on March 2022, SASAC announced the establishment of a new entity called the Science and Technology Innovation Bureau, the STIB, to promote technological innovation of SOEs. So the digital transformation of large SOEs can provide a roadmap for the digitalization of the respective industries, as many of the SOE leaders are leaders in the industries and they play a pioneering role in the transformation. After which, it will be up to these respective industries to customize and localize their approach according to their own needs. This also means that while large SOEs can provide a roadmap, individual company and provinces will need to implement their digitalization plans based on their local operating environment, constraints, and needs.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stephen and Minister Kartiko, taking experience of China's commitment when it comes to efficiency, speed, and progress to accelerate their digital ecosystem. You mentioned the Great Super App, and also what other initiatives have been carried out by the Ministry of SOEs in terms of supporting Indonesia's digital ecosystem?
Yeah. So based on the estimates, Indonesian digital economy can reach around 320 billion by 2030, and it can actually reach around 18% of our total GDP. So in order for us to catalyze this process, then we have 2 major initiatives. First, at the back end. So Telkom, as one of our large SOE in network development, has already invested huge amount of money for the connectivity. So Telkom already laid down around 170,000 kilometers of fiber and also 250,000 tower. So I think now the coverage in Indonesia is almost around 95%. Can you imagine? I mean, Indonesia is an archipelago country, very complex, but we are investing in some of actually remote area with the, some loss absorption mechanism so that people in the rural area, in the outer island, they can enjoy also digital access. So this I think has been a very tough job for Telkom, but I think we are, as a country, we are moving forward by connecting so many people into the 4G connection actually. The data center, as Mr. Ahmad mentioned, also is very important part after this. So after the connectivity, we want to move to data center and cloud. So now we are building data center. We're actually working with the Singaporean, Singtel, to actually start discussing how we co-develop as the regional largest data center market and the most growing data center market, how to actually we work with the Singapore Telecom to actually combine the forces. And we are also talking to Microsoft about leveraging their cloud capability so that there is a smooth transition to cloud for Indonesian corporation and Indonesian SME. So this is something that we are looking forward that hopefully even SME can have access to cloud with the cheap operating costs. So that if we can do that, then the infrastructure is there. So besides those massive investment at the back, we are also actually involved in a development of startup environment. So as a state enterprise ministry, we don't want to be independent and out of the ecosystem. So we're actually working very closely with the startup community. So we actually run a 5 VC under our ecosystem. We have under Telkom, there is MDI, and then TMI under Telkomsel. We have Mandiri Capital, BRF Ventures, and lastly BNI Ventures. These ventures actually already investing in a lot of startups. So we are investing in almost 330 startups until now. Some of them already becoming unicorn or unicorn. So we are working very closely with a lot of startups and connecting them to our ecosystem and customer base. So we are very close with all the startup community. And now we have 3 stages development for the startup communities in which we try to push the growth or the ideally at the stage, we have what we call this Indonesia Digital Tribe Initiative, in which we actually engage thousands of Indonesia, educate them on the first mile of actually building an apps. And on the second phase, we're investing through our startup day. Actually, we just launched it a week ago with the president, that we are actually asking all these early adopter to actually create a startup company that have an app that can serve connected with state-owned enterprise offline ecosystem. So be it in healthcare or in plantation and so on and so forth. This actually has been quite successful. Last week we have a lot of new talent that are trying to produce app that can connect to our ecosystem. Then on the third phase, which is more on the scale up period, actually our venture has invested a lot there. We have already invested and divested some of them. And we just recently launched what we call the Merah Putih Fund. Because in Indonesia, once you become later stage and probably Series C, Series D, then there is no local funding. Usually they have to sought after for funding from Singapore, from other country, like the like of Sequoia, SoftBank, and so on and so forth. So now we try to also provide a pool of fund that is connected to the whole period, and they are provided to the people who are at the unicorn pre-IPO stage that hopefully can be operated very soon. So with this whole initiative, then we hope that we can also become a catalyst to actually create a whole ecosystem of new startup that are connected to the offline ecosystem of state-owned enterprise.
Minister, you've indeed have emphasized and highlighted such an important recipe to success, and that is the power of collaborations with one another. And Ms. Vaishwali, of course, on highlighting the collaborations and the partnerships that Minister Kartiko has emphasized, how do you think countries should mobilize the various stakeholders within them to capitalize on the trends and boost economic recovery?
So first of all, I should have started by saying congratulations. I think this is one of those things that doesn't get publicized so much in the world. What I heard in the opening panel, what I've heard right now, there is just so much happening here. So first I should start out with congratulations. Now, if I step back and take the same dimensions Patiko took and just articulate it, in my mind, you need 3 layers of the stack, and meaning you need the infrastructure, meaning if you don't have the connectivity, the data centers, the devices, then you know what, the rest almost will not come together. So the fact that you all are preparing that is a good first step. Then in my mind, there's the whole products and services, and figuring out how do we make those products and services come to life, be it in a super app or in your own areas, is quite important, because those are both B2C products or services. They could be more B2B. So think about how you can really provide solutions to your SME and other customers. It could also be smart cities, smart government. So there's a whole set of services at top. And in the middle is what I call platform. The platform is like the super app you talked about, or other platforms that create the connection. Now, if this comes in place, of course you have the users. Now, if this comes in place, then magic begins to happen, but you need 3 more things. You need, in my mind, you need talent, you need good regulation, and you need funding, which are the enablers to then getting this ecosystem to work. And maybe the last advice I would have said is that to get these ecosystems to really work well, of course, you need public and private to come together. So that was really inspiring to hear that it is not just about doing it yourself. Because in this digital and tech-enabled world, speed is important, but also ways of working is important. So I would also encourage that as we think, especially on the services layer, less on the infrastructure layer, really thinking about partnerships to bring in capabilities, partnerships to get speed. In fact, creating separate, I should say, engines or organizations to create different ways of working so you don't get left behind, I think in my mind would be key. But if you can get this entire ecosystem to work, and you'll have made great progress as a start, and keep an eye, as I said, on the enablers, the funding, the talent, the regulation, I think, sky's the limit in terms of where we can go, given, how blessed we are with a young population, how mobile it is, and how it can be really upskilled and reskilled to take up all the new areas that we talked about.
Thank you very much, Ms. Vaishali and Mr. Ahmed, on with the great talents and the right regulations, as well as the good fundings that Ms. Vaishali has emphasized the importance on. Could you share with us, or maybe advise us on what types of digital initiatives should be prioritized to help citizens as well as businesses to recover from the pandemic caused financially for us, and from the pandemic, and especially those that were hit the hardest, and that is the micro, small, and medium enterprises?
Yeah, look, like I said at the start, the COVID, the upside of COVID was that we saw a lot of acceleration happen, and we've actually seen, as we say, 2 years of digital transformation happen in 2 months, if we go back to 2020. But if I were to step back, firstly, I want to reflect on this morning. 60% of assets, or 50% of the assets of Indonesia are with SOEs. And then the advice we heard was SOEs have the strength, but I'm also seeing a very corporate-like thinking that in Indonesia is very different from other countries. And I have the unique privilege of seeing countries all the way from India to China, Japan, all the way to New Zealand, and we see various elements of it. But I must compliment the government here and ministers like you and some that I've met earlier in the day about how decisively forward they're moving with the agenda of digital transformation. Your point on advice is a hard one to give to a government that is so far ahead in its thinking already, but let me try. One, I'd say we continue to focus on talent, and I spoke about skill even at the start. I do think talent is going to be the key differentiator, and therefore inclusive talent is probably one of the agenda that I would say. So I want to thank some of the partners we have, like Telecom and Pertamina, etc. We're working with them to go into what we call coding without barriers, which is to bring women into the technology. There's human capital available, like Tony Blair said earlier today, but we're not being inclusive in our abilities to bring them in. And we're trying to play a role in that. Equally, the challenge that Pak Tiko gave me earlier in my meeting with him, which is how do we bring some of the best practices from different parts of the world into Indonesia so that the wheel is not recreated. And it'll be our endeavor as Microsoft to do that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ahmad, and I'm so glad that you mentioned how women are truly the largest untapped resources of talent in the world. And Mr. Stephen Ng, speaking of China's growth and China being the second largest digital ecosystem in the world, when it comes to talent, funding, and the regulations, I'm sure they're all present and are paid attention to. And could you give us a specific examples of how some of China's initiatives and efforts in digitalization in the Chinese SOEs, especially those efforts that have impacted their state-owned enterprises in China?
Okay, maybe in the interest of time, I'll share 2 specific examples. First one being the financial services industry. As you know, fintech, has been led mostly by the private enterprises in China in terms of the evolution of the digital economy. But as far as SOEs are concerned, the Chinese banks are definitely putting a lot of effort in the development of the economy. For instance, China's 4 major state-owned banks, ICBC, Agricultural Bank, Bank of China, and China Construction Bank, invested something like $13 billion in fintech just last year. And in the past 2 years, large banks have also adjusted their org structure to achieve the transformation. For example, Bank of China, China Construction Bank established a corporate-level financial digitization or fintech-related committees, as well as technology departments such as data centers. So maybe one specific example, I'd like to quote the China Merchants Bank. They have actually improved their digital inclusive financial service system through digital means. During the pandemic, where there was a lack of resources amongst local enterprises, China Merchant actually used fintech to solve some of the problems caused by information asymmetry and also processing bottlenecks. It leveraged on its online digital products and services for SMEs to solve the last mile problem of inclusive finance through digital solutions. As of the end of first half of 2022, the loans to the SMEs of China merchants has actually grown to something like $93 billion. The other example I'd like to share is on the provincial level, how digital economy has helped provinces in China. So in the case of Guangxi region, Guangxi, as you know, is located in the southern part of China, very close to Vietnam. In recent years, Guangxi implemented the central government's strategy of the National Big Data Initiative and accelerated the construction of what they call Digital Guangxi. The growth rate of software and IT services industry has been at the forefront of the region's development for 3 consecutive years. The digital economy has become an important part of the province's economic development, transformation, as well as upgrading. And as part of the strategy, Guangxi's SOE, Guangxi Investment Group, used digital technology to empower traditional industries and took on the leading role in Guangxi's industrial digitalization and the broader task of industrial upgrading. The China ASEAN Digital Economy Industrial Park project led by Guangxi Investment Group is now in full swing. The park attracted nearly 60 enterprises as investors. It is expected that by 2025, more than 300 enterprises will settle in the industrial park, driving investments of more than $1.5 billion. In the park, when you take the subway or a bus, all you need to do is to open the Love Guangxi app and scan the code to enter the station. This popular app in Guangxi integrates more than something like 100 types of handheld services in the whole region, including areas in 14 districts and cities. It has more than 14 million registered users today, and in the next upgrade of the app, it will include more than 50 key application services connecting users to even more government services.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stephen Ng. And Minister Kartiko, after years of strong leaderships and great government policies, and of course, the collaboration and the great partnerships between the government and the people and private institutions. Indonesia now stands on the cusp of upper middle income status, and it is impossible to reach without the great collaboration and support from the SOEs, particularly from the Ministry of SOEs. So my question is, how does your ministry provide and utilize digital infrastructure to help the public for better public service delivery? And how do you think the digitalization has impacted the nation in a broader sense, in a broader economy?
Yeah. We have 2 major initiatives here. I think first, as I mentioned earlier, about GovTech. The GovTech, I think Indonesia now is forming a team for GovTech advancement, and we actually using one of our company, Peruri, possibly. It's actually a minting company, but we convert some of them into a digital GovTech company soon. So we are thinking about growing Peruri as one of the key player in the digital GovTech implementation. So this starting from simple things like e-ID, e-payment, e-signature, all those kind of things. And later on, we'll probably go into all kind of government transaction and government services. So this is something that we currently work together with Ministry of Public Services, and hopefully this can be a big initiative moving forward. But besides that, I would like to highlight again the direct role for the enlargement and enabling the MSME. I think MSME in Indonesia currently is around 65 million player, and it actually employed 120 million plus people. So this is really the big chunk of our economy. So the way we approach this MSME is really by approaching them with 2 worlds, the offline and online. I think the post-COVID world teach us that we need to go both, offline and online. So currently we use BRI as the platform to become the hybrid bank. So BRI can really serve the customer through the physical infrastructure, which is not only just the branches, but also the agent. So actually we have 560,000 agents. Can you please show the BRI now? So BRI actually have 20,000 plus branches, but we also have 560,000 agents. So this is interesting because we can really enlarge the satellite branches through this agent so that there are more and more people go into the inclusion. Later on, I will talk in the inclusion session, But I can tell you that Indonesia is probably the fastest in terms of inclusion, from 40 to 86% in 5 years. This is actually because we actually push the offline and online approach, in which the front line in the offline approach is not only just selling product, but they educate and advise the MSME to actually adopt the digital process. So I think this is how we actually push both the government technology and also enabling the MSME to grow larger and with bigger penetration through digitalization offline and online.
And thank you very much, Mr. Kartiko, for mentioning speed, because Ms. Vaishali, we all know that not all digital ecosystem is created the same. And many countries operate differently. Therefore, the speed on how to get to a better digital ecosystem is also created differently as well. So especially in the context of countries with a nascent digital ecosystem, those that are at a slower speed compared to the rest of them, what are the top challenges you think it is to establish or to build a better digital ecosystem?
That's a good question. I'll shift it as more, what is it that we need to do more of? Because I think we're already doing a lot. And so rather than a challenge, I see it as an opportunity. So the first is, I would say, as I said, each of you SOEs controls so much of the economy. You all really can play a pretty big role in not just providing services that, that go outside your core business in terms of what elements can you do which are digital and disrupt before someone comes and disrupts you. So that's one bit that I had started out with. The second bit is funding. It's a big challenge. I don't think the government, you look at public sector spend in ICT, it's never going to be, it's a much smaller share than the West. Again, the SOEs and the private sector need to come in there, as well as the partnerships you mentioned with Microsoft, Singtel, others. Partnerships need to come in to create that funding. The third, and I think, Ahmed, you mentioned this, talent. I can't emphasize talent because honestly, you look at the future skills index that we developed for 50 countries in the world. I would say we've made a lot of progress in Indonesia, but there's a lot more to do. You look at all the skills, software, data science, data visualization, cyber, UI, UX, I can go on and on and on. And we really need to, in the short term, find quick ways to get people on board, not like a 5-year degree. You in SOEs can also train your people and reskill and upskill them to create a different pathway. It's not employability for life. And then midterm, you can influence education, curriculum, and so on. And then the last is, you already are doing it, so I don't need to give you the advice, which is, which parts of the government do you want to directly take on and spearhead, which is e-citizen services that create value. And I was actually going to use GovTech and DTA in Australia as an example, but you've already started on that journey, which is fantastic.
And thank you very much, Ms. Vaishali. And of course, Mr. Ahmed, you have a lot to say when it comes to opportunities. And I refuse to see it as a challenge either, because you said so. And Mr. Ahmed, going forward, how do you think businesses should collaborate with public sectors to highlight on these opportunities to build a better digital ecosystem?
Yeah, no, thank you for that. Look, I want to firstly congratulate the government in Indonesia for being a big voice for the Global South. And I think the Global South will play a huge role in creating more equitable growth and equitable distribution of many sorts of power in the world. As I go back and reflect on, Pak Eric spoke about the 4 priorities, and I'll pick a couple maybe. Technology will play a huge role in agricultural productivity and agricultural sustainability. Equally, technology will play a huge role in green transformation of the supply chains, which have become so critical for our progress in the future. As Indonesia pivots to becoming a 40% digital economy by 2030, at the core of the economy, with SOEs being front and center for it, these are the 2 big motions that I think would be really, really important. The third area I think he spoke about was healthcare, which, if I were to rephrase and say digital biology, it's probably one of the most unexplored sciences in the world. And with the population size that you have to support, I think healthcare and digital biology would be perhaps one big area of opportunity as well. In closing, I'd say Microsoft is working with many different governments across the world. We share the best of the information available, the best of the IP available with governments to secure them. 3 years ago, or just under 3 years ago, a biological virus brought the world down. Our worry continues to remain that a technology virus could, cause impediments in the world. So I encourage the Indonesian government to think very deeply about cyber and cyber protection.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ahmad and Mr. Stephen, Minister Kartiko, and Ms. Vaishali. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us here today. And ladies and gentlemen, as time is up, even though we have so much more to talk about, and ladies and gentlemen, as we see as they've predicted in year 2050, we'll have 9 billion people to feed, to clothe, to transport, to cure, to educate, as well as to employ. And we'll have an unlimited amount of a demand of a consumption. And ladies and gentlemen, let us hope that the drive to accelerate the digital economy as well as digital ecosystem will catch up to that stage. And thanks to digital economy, ladies and gentlemen, it sure has been an effective way to help us to reduce unemployment and to improve our connections with one another, as well as increase the quality of life, connectivity, as well as boosting access of knowledge and public services. And on behalf of our dearest organizers, I'd like to once again extend our profound gratitude and sincere thanks to everyone for your participation here today, particularly our dearest speakers. Let's give them the big round of applause. Thank you so much. And now I'd like to return the stage back to our MC.
To all speakers, we would like to invite you to please remain on the stage.
To our speakers, Ms. Vaishali and Mr.
To present token of appreciation to our speakers and moderator. Thank you very much. Yes, please stay up for a photo session. Thank you, speakers and moderator. You may return to your seats. Ladies and gentlemen, next on our agenda, we will hold our third panel discussion.